We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Well, we're close to not worthy, not to having Marita Noon here. We are News New Mexico. Got to Aaron Henry Diaz here, also Rachel Pulaski. I'm Michael Swickard. So Marita Noon is here, and she has energymakes.america.org, yes. Crony Capitalism and President Obama, How the System Really Works. Your column. Let's talk about that.
Yes, and I understand that you already had Harvey Yates on, which is really what my column is about. So your listeners have had kind of a tease, or not even a tease. They've kind of had the real thing, where my column is perhaps a tease, but I maybe make a connection that you all didn't make.
Well, let's start with the crony capitalism. What does that mean?
Well, crony capitalism is you know, for me, when I read this book, it was eye-opening for me. A friend of mine who does a lot of work in Washington, D.C., kind of scoffed at what I said in crony capitalism, because I kind of explained what it is, and he's like, oh, everybody knows that. And I said, no, I mean, basically it's a method where a person makes money off of a connection to a friend who is in a position of power. I mean, that's kind of an oversimplified view, but that's kind of what I thought it was. And I connected it to my own experience. When I hear the term crony capitalism on the news, for example, I connect it to my experience. And I used to run the largest Christian writers conference in the country. And when I used to run that Christian writers conference, I had friends who helped me. They volunteered. They helped me do things as a conference. And these friends of mine were people who wanted to be writers. So when it was time to set up the appointments with the editors, where the people who want to be writers can meet with the editors and say to the editor, look, here, this is what I've done. Do you like it? Do you want to publish it? I would make an appointment. I would make it a point of helping my friends. My friends who helped me got better appointments with the editors. They got early appointments with the editors, and I made sure they met with the editor they wanted. Okay, so in my little experience, that's kind of how I related crony capitalism.
So it's you scratch my back, I scratch yours.
Exactly. That was my idea of crony capitalism until I read Harvey Yates' book, Governor Richardson and Crony Capitalism. And from reading that book, I discovered how truly evil and corrupt crony capitalism is, and how much it hurts, the people, and in our case, obviously, of course, the state of New Mexico.
Now, if we were trying to figure out, this has been something we've talked about for a number of months. How many billions of dollars did Bill Richardson cost New Mexico?
Well, according to Harvey Yates, figuring in the book, he cost Governor Richardson just with this one rule. So when you say, how much did Governor Richardson's crony capitalism cost the state of New Mexico, who knows? I mean, we may never know what Governor Richardson cost the state of New Mexico in revenues, in hard dollars, but we do know what this one rule, and I believe what Harvey lays out in his book about the HIT rule, and how this one rule cost the state of New Mexico $6 billion in revenue. That's billion with a B, and remember, we in New Mexico, we are a poor state. $6 billion is a huge amount of money to the state of New Mexico. And it costs, according to Harvey's figuring on this, it costs the government of New Mexico specifically $1 billion. Now, with the deficit that Governor Richardson left the state with, this one bill, or this one rule alone, could have made the difference.
Now, Marita, it seems like the PIT rule, and among other environmental agenda items that the Richardson administration imposed on New Mexico oil and gas producers, this was all it was crony capitalism, but all in the mask of environmentalism. How are we doing well in pulling those regulations back under this administration?
Well, this particular rule in and of itself is currently in the midst of hearings to have it not rolled back, and this rule has a long history. So what's the rule? The Pitt rule, which most people are like, the Pitt rule? What the heck are you talking about? Unless you're in the oil and gas industry, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't be following it.
Right.
But this one rule is actually older than I am. The Pitt rule is actually 4 days older than I am. So we've had a Pitt rule for a long, long time in the state of New Mexico. However, it's this particular version, which is Pitt Rule 17, that is the problem. Now, frankly, I don't understand the numbering because before Pitt Rule 17 was Pitt Rule 50. So the numbering system in New Mexico, maybe it's part of the New Mexico education system, we can't count. But Pitt Rule 17 is the one that is the problem, and we are currently having hearings to dial it back. 'Cause what it did, Pitt Rule 17, applied a regulation statewide, regardless of whether the geology required that when you drill a well, any kind of well, you create along with that well waste matter. You drill and there's a space that there's nothing, no rock, no dirt, no mud, where there used to be something. And it's the long, narrow space where the well bore is. So when you do that, you create a lot of waste. The waste in the old days used to just be dumped on the ground and left there. Then the Pitt rule came in and said, no, you've got to do various things with the pits. Each rule iteration had different regulations. But this current Pitt rule requires that you take the waste comes out of the well, it goes into a lined kind of divot in the ground, what they call a pit. It goes into a lined pit, and then that waste matter must be hauled off to an approved site. Well, surprisingly, through various things that are outlined in that book, that the Pitt rule said the only place that turned out that you could take your waste was to a remediation facility owned by Johnny Cope, one of Bill Richardson's longtime cronies.
Yeah, that name sounds pretty familiar for any Wall-iner in New Mexico politics. He owned a business that specializes in this waste management, correct?
Correct. It was called Controlled Recovery, Inc., known as CRI, and it was down in Hobbs. So even if you were drilling a well in Farmington, the only place you could take the waste in the pit was to take it, have it trucked at large expense, and of course Johnny Cope amazingly owns the trucks, that you could only take it to CRI all the way down in Hobbs. And this drastically reduced the rig count in the state of New Mexico because that people thought, well, if you weren't positive if it was going to be profitable, if it was what would be called a marginal well, that extra $250,000 of costs that this Pitt rule cost you would be enough to make you say, you know what, I'm going to drill somewhere else. I'm going to drill in another state. When this Pitt rule was first put in, it was in the beginning of when I was getting involved in energy issues. And I remember I was in Roswell one day, and I was at some event, doesn't matter what the event was, and a guy said to me, you know, my office is down the hall from the office of Universal Drilling. And he said it used to be that every Friday afternoon he would see Mrs. Gonzalez and Mrs. Martinez and Mrs., whoever, Santiago and so forth, going down the hall with their children in tow to pick up their paycheck at Universal Drilling. And he said, since this rule's gone in, I don't see those people coming to get their checks.
More with Marita Noon. When we come back, we'll talk a little more about being in the pits with Pitt Rule 17. We are News New Mexico.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Yeah, you can. We are News New Mexico for Tuesday, June 12, 2012. Talking with Marita Noon, EnergyMakesAmericaGreat.org. And we do have the truth with Marita Noon. Marita, we're talking about crony capitalism and President Obama, how the system really works. Certainly with Bill Richardson, when he instituted Pit Rule 17 that made you have to deal with one of his friends. Have you actually gone out and watched him drill?
I have actually gone out and watched them drill, yes. And interestingly, the one and only time I have actually watched them drill was in Santa Fe County.
All right. Now, when you were watching that and you saw the stuff come up and they slooshed it over into their holding pit, I hate to say, it doesn't look like raw sewage. It doesn't look like it's that bad. Normally, you get it all over yourself if you're out there, and especially if the driller wants to throw a little of it on you. There's no safe place to stand. But it's drilling mud, and it's let's just say that I suspect you could eat a spoonful of it and not die.
Actually, you could probably eat a spoonful of it and be more healthy, because I'm sure you are well aware that a lot of research is coming out that we as a society are way too sanitary, and that the kids need to eat more dirt. So probably, you could eat a spoonful. I mean, it's stuff that comes out of the earth. Yeah, for the most part, it's all organic matter for the most part.
And basically you've got this kind of mud that helps that lubricates the drill head, and you got whatever it is you're cutting up going through rock and sand and dirt and things like this. They make it sound like whatever's down in the well is somewhat like the La Brea tar pits, and no, it's not really that. Although you remember that the way we learned about oil was in Pennsylvania, they basically had it up into their water system.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, as we have discussed before, a lot of that comes out of the ocean naturally, and it does. The natural gas that we see sometimes as being used as a proof that fracking has damaged water tables when we see natural gas coming out of the faucet. That kind of stuff happened long before people knew that there was a resource there.
Absolutely. So this whole, and I happen to know some of the drillers. A couple of my I wouldn't call them friends. I mean, they don't get a Christmas card from me, but they're people I go drink coffee with, and have known them since I was a very young boy.
We need to fix that Christmas card thing.
I know.
I hope they're listening.
Well, no, I know they're in Texas now because they just didn't want to spend the extra money. There was no reason for the extra money, and it made them very unhappy.
Yeah, there was a reason.
Bill Richardson's reelection.
Bill Richardson's reelection campaign.
Yeah, his election to president. Yes, and
his reelection for his second term, both.
Well, and the thing that these drillers said to me was they sit there, they work all day long, and they're aware of this, and it really burns them up, and that's when they decide, nope. I'm just going to move the rig over 50 miles and not have to do that.
Yep.
And
that's what they did. And New Mexico lost jobs. We lost revenue. We lost all kinds of things. And that's why, gratefully, Susana Martinez has kept her campaign promise. And she is working on having a hearing and looking at the science of what should this rule really be. They're not just wiping it out. They're not just saying, no, we don't care about the ground. We don't care about the environment. No, that's not what she's saying. They're saying, we want to look at the science and look at the formation in different basins and see where the water tables are and make a sound science-based decision rather than one that is based on you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours.
So, Marita Noon, let me ask this question, which it's a tough question to ask about patience, which is, I was talking with Congressman Pierce just before you came on, and when he talks about what's really happening, and, I mean, it really is happening, and then somebody on the other side says, nuh-uh, it's not that. I've had people tell me all the time that, no, there wasn't anybody who went to Texas because of the pit rule, and I go, I'll give you some names, and I don't need them because I'm going to tell you right now nobody did. How do you deal with when they just go flat in the face of the truth?
Well, you and I have talked about this many times because there's a certain percentage of the population that believes what they want to believe regardless of what the facts show them. But in Harvey's book, he has very carefully documented the actual rig count. And one of the things that even people who are willing to look at the data sort of will say is that, no, it wasn't. They may say exactly what you said. No one left the state. And, of course, I was citing earlier all the people that no longer went to get their paychecks from Universal Drilling.
Yep.
When I heard that story, I personally went to the owner of Universal Drilling and asked him, would you tell me what's going on? And this was several years ago now. And he said that we used to have 50 drilling rigs drilling in this state all the time. And he said most of them are now working out of state. We've taken them out of state. But where the data appears a little skewed is that the rigs did not leave the state, boom, once the pit rule was implemented. They left the state earlier when the pit rule draft was introduced. And there's been enough things along the line that the drillers, the guys in the business of drilling the wells, realized that what this pit rule was, that it was going to be implemented. So the minute the draft was introduced, the people started leaving, and our rig count in the state of New Mexico for years, and Harvey has a chart in the book that tracks this, our rig count paralleled the surrounding states. Now, of course, Texas is a bigger state. They had more rigs always than we do, but we paralleled when the things went up, our rig counts went up in all four states, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. When things were bad, the rig count went down, and so forth. So it paralleled. However, post-pit rule draft introduction, our rig count in the state of New Mexico went below Colorado's for the first time in 10 years. Now, that drop happened before the pit rule was actually finalized. But, therefore, it makes people such as those that you're referring to who deny this say, oh, no, look, here's when the pit rule was introduced, or, when it was finalized, and look, the rig count did not drop that drastically. No, it dropped when it was introduced. The first draft was introduced.
Marita Noon, EnergyMakesAmericaGreat.org. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.